This is a Shiur Klalli Parasha Matos Masei. And the shiur is taking place on Thursday night, Rosh Chodesh Menachem Ov, Toshin Ayin Beis, Rosh Chodesh Menachem Aleph Menachem Ov, Toshin Ayin Beis, and we're referring to chapter Lamed Aleph, Pasuk Aleph, chapter 31, Pasuk 1. So the pasuk begins with Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Leimor, that Hashem spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu, and then he says, Nikoim nikmas B'nai Yisrael me'eis hamidyanim. You must take the revenge. Nikoim, you must take the revenge. Nikmas, the vengeance. You must take the revenge of the vengeance of the B'nai Yisrael from the people of the Midianites. The Midianim is the Midianites. Achar teyosaf el amecha. After that, following that, you'll take the Nakoma from the Midianim, then you'll have to pass away. In other words, that even though in Parasha Pinchas, which was last week's Parasha, the Eibusha already told Moshe Rabbeinu that he would have to go up onto the Mount Har Aravim, and he would have to pass away there and everything. Nonetheless, Hashem is waiting for the actual moment of Moshe's passing until, first of all, he will carry out this final task of carrying out the vengeance of the Jewish people in the Midianim. Vayidaber Moshe el ha'am, and Moshe spoke to the people, Leimor, to say to them, Hey choltu mi itchem, you should make a militarization from amongst you. You should make groups of military men, fighting men who are prepared to go. Hey choltu is a word meaning like to mobilize groups of people from amongst yourselves. Anoshim latzavor, they should be people for the army. V'yu al Midian, and you should be upon Midian. Lo seis nikmas Hashem b'Midian. It should be over Midian to give the vengeance of Hashem b'Midian. In the people called Midian, in the Midianites. Elef l'mateh, 1,000 from each tribe, or from each, that's right, from each tribe. L'chol matei Yisrael tishlechu latzavah, and all the tribes shall provide these people that you shall send to the army for this purpose of fighting the Midianites. Vayimosru mi alfei Yisrael, and it was given over from the thousands of the Jewish people, elef l'mateh, 1,000 from each tribe, shneim osor elef chalutzei tzavah. There was altogether 12,000, since there are 12 tribes, so there were 1,000 from each tribe, so altogether there was 12,000 fighting men, chalutzei tzavah. And then it's written that Moshe sent them to the war against Midian together with Pinchas ben Elazar, HaKohen. Well, we've already had a lot about Pinchas. And the description of the war that they carried out against Midian, which is very successful, and a very, absolute war of destruction against these Midianites. So now, the truth is, we've already met up with this concept, haven't we? Listen, if you think I'm going to break my head and come down and wait around for people a quarter of an hour, just to have you read something else altogether while I'm talking.
Sorry.
I didn't. I'm not going to do that. I'm sorry. I've had enough messing around as it is. I was here. I've just been delayed by people. So if you're going to be at the class, at least pay attention. As we've already met up with the concept of the Midianites, and that was in Parasha Pinchas, that we see that immediately after Pinchas killed Zimri ben Salul and Cosby bas Tzur, then we find immediately after that that the Eibishter said to the Yidden, immediately after that, the Eibishter said to the Yidden that they must make enemies of the Midianites. It's written over there, the beginning of Parasha Pinchas in chapter Kof Hey, in Perek Kof Zayin, Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Leimer, Tzoroer es HaMidyanim. You must make trouble for the Midyanim, v'hikisem oisam, you must smite them. Smite them means to beat them heavily, militarily. Yeah. Why? Because they literally have plotted against you evilly. Because they've been literally your trouble seekers with their plots that they made against you. Al Dvar Po'er. And Dvar Po'er means the Avodah Zorah of Baal Po'er. And that was the Avodah Zorah connected with the Bnei Midian and the Bnei Moav, that they tempted the Yidden into immorality at the end of Parasha Bolak. We learn about it. And that was the Eitzah of Bilam Harosha. But when he finished all his unsuccessful attempt to curse the Yidden in his own visit to Bolak, he nonetheless gave them an Eitzah when he was leaving, that if you want to really bring the Jewish people down and get against them, then get them in their morality. And the Bnei Moav sent there, but the Midianites also sent their daughters, even to the point that Cosby bas Tzur, she was a. You have something there, or are you looking in your Chumash?
Yes.
I'll try not to do anything else on the way. Cosby bas Tzur was a princess of the Midianites, and the Midianites joined in very readily together with the Bnei Moav in sending their daughters to tempt the Yidden into the immorality with the whole thing. And it's well known that Rashi describes rather unpleasantly in Parasha Bolak at the end how when these women tempted the Yidden, that was like the payment for the thing, for the harlotry, was you had to bow down to the Baal Po'er, to the whole thing of the Avodah Zorah of Po'er. So we see then that it's already been said at the beginning of Parasha Pinchas that you must make enemies, or you must, as it were, be hostile to the Midianites, and you must smite them. So it would appear to be two inyanim. You have to look at them as a hateful people, as people that are your enemies, and then you must also smite them militarily in war. So over there, Rashi comes along way over there in Parasha Pinchas. Rashi says that the union of tzoroyer is a how do you call it, a participle of the verb, like we say in reference to Shabbos. We say zocher Hashem Shabbos le lekatchoy. Who was that? I've become the whole unpopular villain of the piece. I've been trying to persuade these guys not to be using the whole time, because the air conditioner over there is just ruined. It's completely. You notice all the water's running out now. It's been going day and night the whole time, just for 2 or 3 people. And I've tried to tell them that they're not doing the right thing, that they can go upstairs and use the air conditioner. they can use the air conditioner an hour or two a day, but not sit there day and night. So I'm no longer a pop. I'm sort of a laughing stock, but what can I do? I'm only just asking for a little bit of decent behavior, I'm not demanding anything, cruel or terrible. I'm just, it's just a simple thing. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Let's go ahead. So that word sorer, so Rashi says over there, is a participial form of the verb, which is like zocher es yom hashabbos l'kodshe, or we say shomer es yom hashabbos, that you must guard the day of Shabbos. That means to say it's not a usage of the verb in a direct way. It's like a participial thing, and it's a continuous use of the verb. It's what we call a continuous, like a tense. However, it can also be a imperative. It's not only just a continuous. So therefore, Rashi is very careful to bring the two dogmois from Shabbos, and then he says over there tzorer, and Rashi adds that that's a participial usage of the verb like zocher v'shomer in reference to Shabbos, and then he says Aleichem le'ayev oisom. It is upon you, in other words, you are being commanded to make enemies out of the Midyanim. La'ayev otam. It's from the word oyev. It's like a verb from the word oyev. La'ayev otam. Now that would tend to indicate that there's like two, what we might call definitional inyanim here. Rashi is pointing out that there are two words over there, tzorer and hikisem, and to smite. So tzorer, says Rashi, is a continuous verb, like zocher v'shomer, but they go on the whole time. And that means that you've got to make enemies out of the Midianites in a permanent way. You've got to become, as it were, a permanent enemy and hostile person towards what Midian is and what they represent. Right? And then there's another mitzvah, or another inyan, to smite them in war. And that's what we're dealing with now. In this Parasha, we're coming to the actual commandment of carrying out that commandment to smite them. But that's a war. So a war you make once and then you finish, or maybe you might make it later on in history if they gather together again. But a war is not a continuous thing. So it's two inyanim. You've got to continuously, as it were, hate the Midianites, very similar to what we find by Amalek. A very similar sort of a gather. And then you've got to smite them. You've got to hit them in war. So there appears to be a necessity in Midian to always be against and to hate and to repel spiritually and conceptually Midian. There's people called Midian, and then there's an inyan also to smite them and to actually hit them and get them out of the picture, because the type of thing they did, they can continue. They might do it to you again, or they might look for some other eitzah as how to overcome it. So therefore, it follows from that there's a certain enmity which has been created towards the Midianites. Comes along now Moshe Rabbeinu, as in answer to Hashem's commandment, and he says that you should go out and you should take people from each tribe, only 1,000. Now that's not a lot. If you take into account, tell me, sorry, would you mind just drinking that water and filling it with it? I find it a little bit sort of unsettling in a class when somebody's every now and then taking a swig, It's like, it's like he would be drinking some musky or something. I just find it slightly immovable, Don't be angry with it. There's of a middle of Isa, it's not really a great deal of people. 1,000 from each tribe is not a tremendous number. Now, Rashi says here also a very interesting thing. Rashi says that l'choira, the Moavim were the ones who actually sent their daughters. The Midianites joined in. So they sent also their daughter, and they sent even a princely member of their families in order to. She was supposed to be some really hot star, this Cosby bust saw. So it's put down in Madrasa. So Rashi asked the question, why don't we go against the Moavites? Why only the Midianim? So Rashi's masbir that really the Midianim, they came into the whole thing. They went into a quarrel which wasn't theirs. Maybe the Moavites, they were worried that the Yidden were going to come. Now, also the Moavites weren't worried ultimately that they would be wiped out by the Yidden, because the Moav is from the B'nai Lot, from the children of Lot, and there's a Mefurish Tzivui in the Torah that you must not make war against the sons of Lot, not Moav and not Ammon. So they wouldn't have actually wiped them out, but they were worried that maybe they wouldn't wipe them out, but they made them a lot of trouble. So Moav was worried that of a Midian was another country that had nothing to do with anybody. And so Rashi's masbir that maybe the Moavites, yeah, we can understand them. Maybe we might want to do something to take the revenge. But what are we doing with Midian? Midian doesn't have to do with anything. So therefore Rashi says that they came into a quarrel which wasn't theirs. Which means that if they came into a quarrel which wasn't theirs, well, that would tend to indicate that there was some principle. There's like a Inyan the Midianites had with Yidden. There was some sort of principle Inyan that led them to mix in and try and bring the Yidden down in the terrible way that they did. They even sent a princess of one of their kings to try and get one of the leading members of the tribes of the Yidden, Zimri ben Salu. You had to get him into trouble. Right? So we see then that Rashi points out that the Midianites were people who came in like on principle into something that really had nothing to do with them. Why not the Moavites? Why didn't you at least do something to them or take some sort of... So Rashi points out that there was two very special people who were going to come out of Moav and Ammon. And for that reason, the Abish didn't want to chapel with them, Klalli. One of them was Ruth, a Moavis, and Naamor, Ammonius. Now Naamor, she was the mother. She was one of the wives of Shlomo HaMelech. She was one of the, and exactly whether she became a full Giuris or not, I'm not sure. But she was like a sort of a Giuris of some sort, I don't know. But later, it wasn't so good with her towards the end. But Ruth was she was the great grandmother of David HaMelech. Through Ruth was born David HaMelech. So we see then. Well, the only thing we can hope is that you won't soil any of those beautiful, clean clothes that you're getting with. Now, we worked it out without him telling us. We worked out the cheshbon without being told. It wasn't a very difficult mathematical equation. But I'm going to come out if he's there, that the Moavites, they were going to produce one person. And for that matter, it's a little bit of the Ramban asked that ultimately what could they really have done to the Moavites? Because of course there was this thing that Hashem said not to really destroy the Moavites or do anything to them because they're the sons of Lot. And therefore they couldn't ultimately, but nonetheless they could have maybe, like we said, and that's what they were afraid of, that made them trouble. Anyway, but for whatever reason, Rashi brings like it's a Gemara, Masechet Bava Kama, and it needs, it's a delicate Gemara, and it's got a few tricky aspects to it, but that's what Rashi brings, that because Moav was going to produce root, and therefore we let them alone altogether. But that's a very amazing Musa Haskell law on its own, and the Gemara brings over there, Omar Rabbi Yeshua ben Kocha, he learns from that a klal that you can see sometimes if there's something good that's going to come out of a whole people or even out of an individual or a whole people or whatever it may be, or an organization, if they're going to produce, or they have produced something which is really worthwhile, then it could be the Eibush will forego them and the whole people, even though the whole people may not be so praiseworthy, Hashem might forego them for something good that's going to come out later, even though it hasn't happened yet, because Ruth hadn't come out yet. She's only going to come out later in the generation of Boaz. So it's a very amazing idea that sometimes Hashem will move the whole hashgacha of the world and of the creation for the sake of certain individuals. That's really an amazing Musa Haskell. And it reminded me, when I was learning it, reminded me of there's a famous Rambam. And every now and then we meet up with these amazing concepts in the Rambam. We're going to meet up with another one later on, but I'll have to refer to it briefly because we're running out of time. But just very briefly, there's a Rambam in Parasha Mishnah, and the Pirush that he wrote on the Mishnah is in Masechta Nedorim of all places. Yeah, I looked it up just a couple of months ago. It's in Masechta Nedorim. But the Rambam brings over there that there was once a whole big city. Whether this is just a moshel, but it could happen. There was once a huge city that was built by Goyim. It was this nation of Goyim built a huge city, and they built all sorts of beautiful buildings and a palace for their king, and who knows what they didn't build, and it was big and it was that. And in the middle of one of the squares in the public, they built like a fountain where there was water, where if you wanted, you could come and drink from this, like a public drinking fountain. But it was nicely made. All of a sudden, one day there came along an Ehrlich Yid, the Rambam calls him a chosid, meaning a very pious Yid, comes into the town, and he's terribly, terribly thirsty, and he's about to pass out from dehydration. He can't hold out anymore without water. And all of a sudden he sees in the middle of this huge goyish town, he goes over there and he drinks in the water and a meisha for his snafshay, and he came back to his inn and he went on ahead with his task in life. Says the Rambam that the whole reason that whole city had to be built, and had to stand for 250 years or however long it stood, that city, and the whole reason it was there, and all these thousands of workers that he put in to build up the city and the whole thing, was only that this chosid, each chosid, should come, feel terribly thirsty, and drink from that fountain. That was the whole reason why the whole city was built for that reason, and stood for so many X years before. So, a very similar principle, Rashi says, why only the Midyanim and not the Moabites? Because the Moabites were going to produce Ruth. Now, in the Gemara, there's certain questions can be asked, and it's not so simple. There's certain Pilpulim, and the Ramban gets onto that question, and the Ramban presses a bit on that. But nonetheless, that's the Gemara, and that's what Rashi says. And it's a very interesting hint that the Moabites didn't cop it, the Midyanim copped. However, everything is Bashgacha Pratim, and everything is Betachlas Adiyuk. The fact that the Midianites, they're the ones that are going to cop it, and the Midianites are not going to produce anybody like Ruth. And there's not going to be the whole amazing principle, so it would tend to imply there's something very remarkable about the Midianites, Lara, not Lara, which makes them what they are. And therefore the Ikka, twice, first of all, to make them a sort of a spiritual enmity forever, and then a destruction of them. When it comes to the actual destruction, but the Eibush says to Moshe, you must take the Nakoma, the vengeance of the Jewish people from the Midianites. Moshe Rabbeinu, when he tells the mitzvah to the Yidden, he says you should take the vengeance of Hashem. Yeah, Nikmas Hashem b'Midian. You should put the Nakoma of the Eibishter in Midian. So we see them as a verging here from Nikmas B'nai Yisrael. Now what would be the Nakoma of the B'nai Yisrael? Because there was a terrible plague as a result of all this immorality. 24,000 people died. But the whole Indian, and this was an attempt to break their advance further and to reach eventually to swallow the whole thing. So there's a certain nakoma and a certain vengeance for the Yidden. And so Moshe Rabbeinu was a leader of the Yidden, and I thought he took Hashem's commandment to get at the Midianites in that way, in that Indian. However, when it came to, when I say that's what he received from Hashem gave it to him in that way, thinking that's the way it would sort of be mishkabel in the kelim hilamata, to use the expression. However, when Moshe Rabbeinu comes to pass on the word to the Yidden, he says no, it's the nakoma of Hashem, the Shem Havai, Yud Kei Vav Kei. Now that's very bolet. That's very. I mean, it's in two psukim, difference. All of a sudden the switch, and that oima dorshen. There's some Indian there that must be hidden in that whole thing, and the fact that there's another very interesting point, and that is that Rashi brings over here that also, l'kol Matos Yisrael, you have to take 1,000 from each tribe. Has to be l'chol Matos Yisrael, and then he says there were 12,000, which means from all the 12 tribes. Now, normally going to war only went 11 tribes went to war, because Shevet Levi didn't go to war. It's written before earlier in the psukim that Shevet Levi doesn't get a nachla in Yisrael, and Shevet Levi doesn't get any part of the country and the whole thing. Therefore, their whole thing is only to be Lamed Lifnei Hashem v'Leshoresh, the Kohanim and the Levim in that respect are together. They don't go to war. They don't fight war. Because that's not their Indian. They have therefore they also have, the Rambam brings it down in the end of not far from where we are now in the Shiur Rambam. The Rambam brings it down that therefore they get no chelik in the spoil. When there's been a war and mechalik the spoil, the Levim and the Kohanim don't have any part in that. And also here in Midian they didn't, which is unusual because they did take part in this war. And therefore Rashi says, l'chol Matos Yisrael, l'rabbi Shevet Levi, to include Shevet Levi. That even Shevet Levi had to actually give 1,000 people. Some people are not maybe a whole 1,000, but they had to give people in order to take part in the war. And Shevet Levi were members of the military, even although they didn't actually take a port. It's like an interesting middle point. They took part in the war, but they didn't take part in the spoil. However, Hashem later says to give a meches, that all the military people should give like a truma out of their spoil. Well, that you had to go to the Levim. That was given to the Levim. And that was mashma that they could also be nana from that, they could take part of that. So it's a very interesting point. Even though they took part in the war, nonetheless, mamish to divide up the spoil, they weren't able to. But they did get something, betzivui Hashem, from the whole Indian. That's the infinite. Now, all this would tend to indicate that there's some very special Indian working behind the scenes here. That this Moshe Rabbeinu also is told by Hashem that immediately you will finish this, then you'll have to leave the world. So the Rebbe Rashab is medayik in the famous Maimah, the Hechaltzu, the famous Maimah which begins with one of these psukim. And when I say it's a famous Maimah, the Rebbe gave it out as a gift to everybody in the year, I think it was Memtez or Nun, I forgot. Anyway, it's a very famous Maimah. Over there, the Rebbe Rashab said it's mashma that once Moshe Rabbeinu had finished this, then he could and probably had to pass away, which would tend to indicate that Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't make his final aliyah to heaven until he'd finished this verse. So it comes along the Erech Chaim HaKodesh, and the Erech Chaim HaKodesh makes a very interesting diuk that we don't find that Moshe Rabbeinu went out to the war. He sent Pinchas out to the war. He sent the Oren, and he sent the Tzitz, as Rashi brings down the whole thing. He sent the ark and the tzitz, the thing that he wore on his forehead, the Kohen Gadol. That he sent out with Pinchas out to the war, but Moshe Rabbeinu didn't go. And yet, nonetheless, the whole thing seems to be dependent on Moshe Rabbeinu. So therefore says the Orach Chaim HaKodesh, and he stresses this point very much. He said, from that we see that this whole Indian here wasn't just an ordinary war. It wasn't just a war to make war against people for military, or as we'll soon see, for territorial reasons. It was a war of nekoma, of vengeance, and not just a physical vengeance, because they didn't take anybody captive. They killed all the males, and even the females. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't. He was angry, but they kept them and so on and so forth. So they didn't really take a great deal of people captive, and the spoil they did take, but they had to give a mechas. They had to give like a truma out of that spoil, which makes it look very unusual, the whole thing. The Orach Chaim HaKodesh says that Moshe Rabbeinu had to take part in the organization of the Nekoma, because it was a very special ruchnistic Indian for Moshe Rabbeinu especially to take care of. And therefore he had to give the orders, and he had to work out how it was going to be, because it wasn't an ordinary war. It wasn't for the usual aims for what you make war. That was a very unusual thing. And therefore it's written Moshe Rabbeinu has to do it, but Lepel he doesn't do anything. Lepel he sends Pinchas and the army, including Levium, goes out. Or Moshe Rabbeinu stayed, as it were, at home. All which tends to indicate that the whole thing was to losses nikmos Hashem, the vengeance of Hashem, in a very remarkable way. That Moshe Rabbeinu took care of that part of it, and that was his inyan, but he didn't actually take part in the actual physical war, which is a sign that the physical war is a necessity to carry out the ultimate purpose of this nekoma. The nekoma is more than just the war. The war is like a detail in the nekoma, but it's not the ultimate, the final story of what this whole war is about. Which presents the question in our minds of what is it about? What is it all about? And furthermore, a very interesting point, just to back the whole thing up, is that if we examine where Midian was, well, unfortunately I don't know. I used to have a map once of old Eretz Yisrael, with the old areas marked out, not the present, is the old areas and everything, with the other countries around like Moav and all Edom and all those things. But I can't find it. I just got so much around as it is in my own, I can't find it. Anyway, if we look where Midian is, then Midian is not part of Eretz Yisrael. It's not part of Eretz Yisrael. And it's not even part of where the Bnei Gad and the Bnei Reuven took. Well, maybe it is. It's sort of like near there. In other words, it's Sichain V'oig,